Welcome to Topic 4 International Market Research. This is the second half of our discussion in international market research, continuing on from our lecture on Tuesday the 16th of October. So to date we've actually looked at international market research in terms of its definition. It can be defined as market research conducted either simultaneously or sequentially to facilitate marketing decisions in more than one country. And the inescapable difference of any aspect of this is that there is an inherent and inescapable difference in terms of the fundamental nature of customers across virtually any two markets. And therefore this demands careful attention, and this is captured through the international marketing research process, of which there are 7 steps. We talked through some of those steps in our initial lecture, and we kicked off again. We looked at defining the problem or situation, cost-benefit analysis, step 3 to develop a research design, which looked at secondary data, primary data, the aspects of reliability and validity, before we moved into the macro level of analysis, and today the political risk. So we looked at the aspect of political risk. So many companies may avoid countries with, for example, elevated levels of terrorist activity. Some countries are heavily regulated with unions. When particular companies are looking at going internationally and choosing a desirable market, they possibly will, when assessing the political risk, look at things such as, depend on the industry naturally enough, but maybe you are a drinks company. Alcohol remains a very politically sensitive product and is outlawed in many Islamic countries, therefore naturally will dictate what type of country and what type of market you will enter. So government stability is important, government interactions, as well as the rules and regulations that exist. Things such as credit rating agencies as potential sources, but also key questions that you'd have to ask yourself: is there a chance of this government collapsing, chance of change in the government, effects of government changes, labour unions, stability of currency, and limits to corporate political activities. Then we have the legal risk. Legal risk is associated with the laws and enforcements of that particular country, and when we take a look at that, we're looking at protection of patents, copyright, and intellectual property. Some countries are exceptionally good at regulating, managing, and protecting these particular rights. However, others may have those particular legislations but are not very good at enforcing them. Let's take a look at qualitative research. This focus is building on theory, more or less from scratch, from the beginning, which is obtaining information without relying on numerical expressions or measurements. It is very useful for understanding culture and very insightful for you, maybe in relation to your case studies. Typically, from a qualitative research, you will extract a smaller number of respondents because it's very much a one-to-one or one-to-few. Often additional research is needed to confirm findings, and often quantitative is brought in to support this. This approach is researcher dependent in terms of their time, energy, and resource. I'll give you an example of one such thing is the milkshake example. In this particular link, which I will provide to you on your Moodle page, Professor Christensen looks at the research him and his colleagues did at Harvard University in relation to McDonald's. So they actually posed a very unique question in relation to the research. It said, what does our product, what type of a job does this product do for you? And in this respect, it was a milkshake. So what does the milkshake do for the person who's buying for it? What type of a job do they do? It's a very unusual take on this particular type of research for this particular type of company. And you'll see through the actual video that it's questioning really the rationale, the motives, the attitudes, the behaviour, and the reasoning behind why people buy a particular product, and largely the usage, conscious or unconscious purchasing of this particular product and what it serves every day. Very interesting, and I'll provide you the link to that. When we take a look at qualitative research methods, these vary. So you have ethnographic research. This is largely upon the fact of really going into an environment and learning, observing and interacting. So for example, marketing managers Unilever and their Indian subsidiary are required to spend 2 months living in rural villages after being hired to allow them to see how consumers interact with companies' products. There are other companies who will do this, and I think it's very, very valid. And sometimes you'll find that even the likes of the retailers will often get top management to come to floor, to work on the floor, to see what it's like to actually be working on the floor, the demands of on the floor, so they have an appreciation of what is required within a very fast-paced retail environment. Observational studies, watching consumers as they shop, make purchases, they garner really rich insights and helps when attempting to combat sort of, we talked about this early with the SRC, and that comes down to your self-reference criteria. So it really takes away from that and tries to help us understand that. Focus groups, as we've looked at previously, are very extensive and they cover 8 to 12 people. Personal interviews, one that I carry out quite a bit, is one-to-one discussions. Very important when you go internationally. What role does the gender and age of the interviewer play when doing research internationally? So cultural nuances make interviews very challenging. For example, age, the gender, and the personal interactions are really significant. So in some cultures, some regions, some countries, females cannot be in a room with a male, whether that's as an interviewer or interviewee, and therefore has to be managed. So is it male to male? Is it female to female? We also have the Delphi technique, and this really taps into expert opinions. So this technique involves a market researcher who assembles a panel or group of experts on the topic of interest. Typically, the questions are posed are designed to forecast or predict future behaviour, so quite high level. With quantitative, you're looking at surveys. So these surveys are set up of questions asked in various settings. They're widely used and typically using large samples. There may be difficulties in international settings in relation to literacy, distribution of surveys, maybe the response biases and the conceptual equivalence problems. So when you use examples like household, what exactly does that mean in Australia versus parts of Africa? So does it vary, and when it does vary, what does that come across as? Very important in terms of survey is relation to the importance of translation. And when we take a look at translation, you can refer to the journal online in relation to this. This is on improving the conceptual foundations of international marketing research by Douglas and Craig. They look at back translation in detail. They highlight that the use of back translation is the best known and most popular method in educational testing and psychology. And basically, following this procedure, a questionnaire is translated from the initial or source language by a bilingual translator who is a native speaker of the target language into the language in which the translation is being made. A bilingual who is a native speaker of that language then translates this version back into the original or source language. So the two versions are then compared in the source language to check for errors and the quality of the transition. So you can see the level of detail that's required. In the same way, you have a parallel translation. And again, this is increasingly recommended in educational psychology and is also the term parallel or committee translation are used together. So a questionnaire is first forward and or back translated. So a committee of bilingual translators and experts then compare versions of the questionnaire to check for errors and meaning. So 2 or more translators are being used for each step of the back translation process. And then a committee will discuss the results and select one final translation. This is extremely important to get right. If you do not get the translation right in the first place, then the results will be skewed as a result. I give you an example today of different experiments, and I will put a link up to this particular tea example that I have found. So it allows researchers to use to discover a cause and effect relationship. It's about manipulating certain variables and controlling others, and researchers seek to identify the effect of independent variables on dependent variables. In this case, I give you is the effect of milk first in a cup of tea, or tea first followed by milk in a cup of tea. Very older, very simple example, but good to watch. Disadvantages is in relation to it is difficult to administer and control, and often sometimes within a laboratory setting or a preset setting it can be perceived to be too artificial. Again, we can purchase a simulation, a realistic setting, but in a lab. Study the effects of the product features, price, colour and purchase likelihood. You also are aware of testing advertisements and marketing materials, and these are exposed to consumers, and which they view a series of commercials and have a dislike indifferent point of view. Researchers test to see if the ad has actually achieved its desired effect, to be funny, to be emotional, to be captive, etc. I will give you, and I have put up a link here in relation to another example of testing, but it's constructed within realistic marketplace conditions and factors can be manipulated between tests. Again, take a look at this particular example and you can see Wendy's testing a new range of burgers. The choice of design is extremely important and it depends upon the decision that has been set forth right up at step one. It's often a combination of different designs is useful. Qualitative data is very rich, i.e. we get really insightful, deep understanding of people's thoughts. Qualitative or quantitative data is more objective and can accommodate larger sample sizes. So look, it's no different from a domestic market, but it becomes naturally a lot more challenging when we go international. Online research has become extremely popular. Maybe you had the opportunity to fill out research online and it's very easy to do. It's cheap, fast data collection, easy access to different types of consumers of all age ranges, geodemographics, etc. However, there are problems. There are lack of internet capabilities and high illiteracy rates in some countries. Some consumer groups are naturally under or overrepresented, and careful translation and survey design is extremely important, particularly when it is online, so there's nobody there to explain the full description if there's any queries. Sources of secondary data can be combined with primary data online to gain a better understanding of the particular target market. Step 4 is to develop a sample. As you can see, members of a population are selected for inclusion in a research study. You survey a small subgroup rather than the entire population. Still, this gets insights about the entire population. It can infer some statistics, and the common objective is shared in international marketing research projects. So a sample is taken and you can infer some form of inference in relation to the statistics from that sample in relation to the full population. There are sampling issues in international research. The difficulties are the lack of availability of accurate demographic information, and this may vary per country. Their collection methods can be severely limited or deliberately altered by the ruling of that particular government, so in itself will actually create challenges. And obtaining a true probability or random is often difficult, so methods are used to reach people to create biases. Examples of technology access and again the level of literacy. Research designs. International research call for the examination of attitudes and behaviours that are relevant within a particular country. They examine differences between cultures or countries. They often can study how consumers behave in a selected context. So how do consumers think or act within a specific context? It can be cross-national, but not necessarily comparative research. Also, research designs can be theoretically based. They study whether a theory garners support across cultures and national borders, which is we as academics do, and it's based upon a specific academic question. So naturally enough, when you're choosing a sample size, ideally larger will provide a more precision, but larger groups, if sample, is expected to give a heterogeneous answer, more varied, more broadly spread. Collecting data is the ability to collect data depends on local customs and technological infrastructure, and this is largely due to the proliferation of different technologies and may vary across the different usage ranges available in different countries. But the growth of mobile phone usage and internet access makes market research generally easy to do. Again, we have uses of maps, and finding addresses can vary across countries and developed and less developed areas. And finally, analyse, interpret data in relation to this. You will kick off at this particular slide in the next lecture.